the EscapeGoat podcast. A podcast series featuring the discussion of many different topics, flaws and all, based on personal whims and fascinations. Hosted by me, David Fagiani, and several different guests. Welcome to the EscapeGoat podcast, episode 27. I'd like to welcome back two guests who've been on the show before and not for a while. I'd like to welcome back Matt, my brother. How you doing?
Hey dude, all good, thank you.
Good. And I'd like to welcome back the one and only Richard Gilbert. How are you getting on?
Oh, right, yeah. I like being one and only, that's good.
Yeah, you're very singular.
Yeah, well, yes, thank you.
I'd like to say, I don't think I've actually said this on mic before, but Rich is the person who made the music for the show, which you hear at the start and end of every episode. So.
I didn't know that, Rich. Well done, congratulations. It's a great theme.
Thank you. It took me up to minutes to do.
I said to Rich something. Have you got any like dross offcuts that I could recycle? And he was like, "Yeah, I do."
That's my meat and potatoes, dross offcuts. Well, I'm writing that down actually, dross offcuts. Strangely enough, actually, that piece of music isn't really an offcut. I plan to use that for an actual thing. So thanks for that.
Yeah, I've just completely diluted it in the public consciousness to the point where it's not worth it.
This theme ain't no good.
Public consciousness, you wish.
Yeah, I was going to say, our audience of literally dozens of people will, at best. Yeah.
How is the fan?
The fan, very good. Singular again.
I hate you guys. I'd like to just check in with you guys about how you've been getting on recently, because it's still pretty bleak. We're still in the middle of, well, I guess in the middle of the UK lockdown of early 2021. Some sort of green shoots in sight in some ways, in terms of infection rates going down and tentative. Well, I mean, they say they're not tentative, but what looked to me like very penciled-in government reopening plans for various sectors of the economy, including some pub opening in April, outdoor stuff, followed by more extensive stuff in May. How have you guys been staying sane in this climate?
I'm just not sure I have stayed sane.
Honest.
I don't know. No, I don't know where it's gone. I've not done much. Apart from worked and played video games, and even then, I haven't played any video games for a while. I don't know how. I don't know where my days go. Mm-hmm. But I think that's true of everyone. I think we're all on the same boat. That's what you meant to say, isn't it?
The evenings pass very quickly, I find, but not necessarily in a good way. Like they kind of not in a sort of rich, fulfilling way. They just kind of go.
No, mine pass swiftly, but with ample lubrication, if you know what I mean.
Yeah,
sweet. Can I come to yours?
No, you literally can't.
Literally can't. Yeah.
That's the problem.
I shall remain dry this month.
How about you, Matt?
Well, I'm great with child still, so and working full time. So yeah, I think it's been. I have to say, it's been a real blessing, like having my son Luca in this time, and because. You constantly have a project, you constantly have something to do. So I think it's actually been a godsend, really. The opposite of being like, people saying being stuck in the house with children is so difficult. It probably would be if I had more than one, but no, it's been fine actually. To be honest, I really can't complain, and I've kept my job the entire time. We've been paid through furlough, so. I really can't complain about the whole thing. And I got the virus. I should add that.
Since we were last on
wow.
Yeah, I had it. Yeah, it was. It sucked. Yeah, and I was off for 10 days isolating, and I had relatively mild symptoms. So I lost my sense of taste and smell, which was the scariest part, because at first you kind of think, oh, isn't that weird? I can't taste anything, and you go around the kitchen eating like cloves and shit, and you're like, wow, that. And then, but after 3 days, it's no laughing matter, because you kind of like, fuck, this may never come back, and I can't be checked. I can't be, no one knows. It's like there's no way of knowing. So yeah, it did get pretty bleak there for like a few days and stuff. However,
you said at the time, didn't you, that because I hadn't really thought about this. I thought of because I haven't had it, and I thought about the sort of loss of taste, smell as being a relatively trivial thing. But you were saying, weren't you? It just takes away all your sort of reward incentives. Basically, it just means
yeah. And for someone like me who likes the food anyway, obviously it's kind of it was a big deal, and I cook a lot, as a hobby as well. So it's what it was. The thing that made me realise it was the cup of coffee at 11 o'clock that you usually have, or the snack you have, in between, breakfast and things, just a little thing that you have. Obviously, main meals as well are just, there's no point you don't, it's like, what do you want for tea? I don't care, it doesn't matter. I can't taste anything.
Just
so,
fuel.
Again, first few days you're sort of laughing about it, like, oh, it's so weird. I can't, and things like spice, you could eat the spiciest, ghost chili you want, and you can't feel it. It's like, they're not just changed, they're absolutely gone. Like, it's like the nerve endings are just completely dead. So you could eat. I was eating things I'd never eaten before, like spicy chilies. I was on like the 6th day when I was feeling a bit down, a bit clinically fed up, shall we say? My low moment. This is funny, actually. This is like, looking back, this is really funny. I got really, really down, and so I thought, I've not had a drink yet, so I thought, oh, maybe just alcohol will just make me feel a bit better, just temporarily, like you do. And I all we had in the house was a bottle of Cointreau, the sort of orange liqueur. So I was sitting there shotting Cointreau, and because I didn't want to eat didn't want to watch anything that I liked, because when you're in that kind of mood, you don't want to watch things you like for some reason. So I put on Wild Wild West, and I was literally sat there in the.
But
dark,
you really did lose your sense of taste.
Yeah, but yeah,
Zing.
And it was somehow soothing. So there you go. That was my Alan Partridge low moment, drinking Cointreau, watching Wiki Wiki Wild Wild West.
I've not watched Wild Wild West in about 20 years or whatever it is. Is there anything redeeming about it?
Just how bonkers it is. I mean, it's like that sort of hilariosity thing where it's like it's so bad. Like, for example, I watched Mary Shelley's Frankenstein last night.
Oh yeah.
That's the Kenneth Branagh one.
Branagh one, and it's so ridiculous. And it's
Isn't Kenneth Branagh the villain in Wild Wild West?
Oh
yes,
yeah, there's a connection. There you go. But no, Richard. I mean, it's so awful, but it's awful in the way it's expensively awful. So it's like there's so much shit going on and lots of moving parts in the background. Not too much attention paid to the foreground, if you know what I mean, of what's going on.
I do.
But it's it's not funny. It's not like exciting in any way. But it's just the fact that it exists is fantastic.
In 1999, everyone was crying out for the combination of Will Smith and Kevin Kline, weren't they?
Yeah.
All the kids were looking for that. It's weird. Why did they never manage to successfully repair Will Smith and Jeff Goldblum?
Oh, the best duo ever. Like that was how well did that work?
I think it was just did it once, don't touch it again. It's perfection.
Oh, you know what? I've just realised: black guy and Jewish guy leading a major Hollywood movie.
I
think I've just answered my own question. No, I think it's funny. Last time I rewatched Independence Day, I'd forgotten how little they're actually on screen together. Like, I guess you can say it with a lot of, because it's obviously scattered geographically for a lot of the movie, and it's kind of like the classic ensemble disaster movie in that sense. But they really only meet in like the last sort of 25 minutes or something, don't they?
I think they meet in Area 51 when I think it's just after Jeff Goldblum has demonstrated that he can disable the shields using the little fighter alien craft.
Yeah.
And then Will Smith steps forward and goes, "I can fly that, sir." And then they become friends.
Yeah, that's it. So they're literally only on screen for 25 minutes, like tops.
Yeah.
Something like that.
But it's up there with Tracy and Hepburn, isn't it? after that.
But I find myself like daily or like at least every other day saying, "Steve!" I just can't help it. Like, look, no hands, Steve. I just can't help it. It's amazing.
I know. Is that the first film in which the line "I have got to get me one of these" was used?
No,
but it wouldn't be the last.
Too many times before. Yeah.
I couldn't believe it when in Batman Begins when they give that line to Gary Oldman. I was just like, no, come on. Come on, you can't just use that again.
And people ask me why I don't like Batman Begins. It's like,
do they?
No, they don't. But I frequently tell them.
Importantly,
I've only seen Batman Begins once. I know we're not on topic, David. You can stop. You can pull the brakes on us whenever you want. But I've only ever seen Batman Begins once, and it was on the television. No, that was it.
Oh.
I've seen The Dark Knight hundreds of times. Well, many times. But I've only seen Batman Begins once.
I continue. I think Batman Begins is okay, and I don't think it's more than okay. I think it's kind of halfway. I mean, whether or not you like The Dark Knight, obviously it's quite distinctive, and it's kind of fully formed, and I think that Batman Begins is on the way to being that, but there's still quite a lot to fill in, basically.
I just don't know why the general consensus is that it's not vastly inferior to the other two. That's kind of what kind of gets to me a bit, is that people are just like, oh no, it's brilliant. It's like it's part of the trilogy, and it's like, yeah, it is, but it's also quite different in a lot of ways. It really does feel like someone. I feel that there would have been more studio interference on that first one because, like you say, you get those poppy moments like that, whereas The Dark Knight just hits the ground running, and it seems to not, like Inception, it just seems to not really care if you're keeping up or not. It just, they just trust the audience to be clever enough to follow, and like the Batman Begins feels like the exact opposite of that, and that's why my excitement for The Dark Knight coming out is I have no idea why I was so excited. I've been talking about this. I don't know if it was just marketing or what it was, but I remember being seriously hyped about it. And it's like, I didn't really like Batman Begins, so I don't know why that would be.
I think it was the Joker, really, wasn't it? Wasn't it just that the Joker was going to be in it? And they made a point of that, like at the end of the first one.
And he just, even from the trailers, you could tell that he looked so awesome, and like the sound bites were great, and yeah, you just knew this was going to be something else.
Yeah. I haven't revisited in quite a long time Batman Begins. I must make a point of that. In terms of media that's been getting me through this lockdown, I've gone kind of full in on BritBox. This isn't like an advert or anything, but I've been watching a bunch of stuff that I probably wouldn't do otherwise. Like I think I mentioned to you, Matt, that I'd been watching. I put on the other night. I was feeling a bit down, and I had BritBox on, and I went full lockdown in the sense that I put on Dinner Ladies.
Oh, wow. When the whistle blows.
Yeah.
When the whistle blows.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because they're both. Do you know there are only 2 series of Dinner Ladies? I feel like it went forever, Dinner Ladies.
No way.
Yeah.
Surely there's 17 seasons.
I thought there were in all seriousness, I thought there were about 5 or something. Like, it just seemed to stretch throughout the late 90s, didn't it? And kind of, but yeah, there were 2 series. You just got kind of that and out.
And how many episodes per series?
Like a normal amount, 6 to 8, I think.
So we were watching the same 6 to 8 episodes of Dinner Ladies over and over again in the 90s, and we didn't realise it.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I did watch an awful lot of that. I mean, it's weird to watch now because it really kind of it's doing that kind of even then retro sitcom setting, and it's kind of it's limited, like it's very limited in setting, like deliberately so. So I think every scene in it, apart from a couple of TV sort of inserts, like when characters are going on telly in the plot, happen in the canteen. It's like it's really in its own way. It's as set bound as the royal family. Just in a more traditional way. Yeah, it was odd because I've got a lot of affection for Victoria Wood, but she's also one of those kind of northern heritage figures that I kind of rail against a little bit as well. Like a bit like Alan Bennett's a very similar figure actually.
I always absent myself from conversations about Dinner Ladies because I just have quite a lot to say, particularly with 2 people from Manchester, and I live in Manchester right now. I've got a lot of time for Victoria Wood, but she has. It's just one of those shows that I think gets such a free pass on account of being. We can't criticise the salt of the earth, sanctified Manc working class stuff.
It's the same. It kind of reminds me of Ben Elton in that respect. Like it's like he's done some great stuff, but he's done some abhorrent stuff as well.
It's got I think her name's Thelma Barlow, but the actress who played Mavis in Coronation Street, who I think had just recently stopped being in Coronation Street when Dinner Ladies came out in '98, but she's in it, obviously. Oh, and Sunita, the woman who went on to play Sunita in Coronation Street as well. So it's got Coronation Street past royalty and future royalty in it. And
also the other reason that it's in my bad books is I think it's the start of Maxine Peake's career.
Oh yeah, no, very early for her, yeah.
Which is if I could send the Terminator back in time to stop the career of Maxine Peake, I would.
It's one of the more vicious things anyone said on this podcast, I think.
No, I'm joking. But again, if Maxine Peake wasn't from Manchester, she wouldn't be talked about as if she's like this absolute titan of British acting.
I've not quite forgiven anyone who was involved with Peterloo yet. I think. I mean, I don't mean the more justifiable not forgiving anyone who was actually involved with Peterloo. I mean the film, which I did. That's like a whole other podcast, but I did not like.
I took my newborn son to see Peterloo. We actually went to they had these things in the Stockport cinema, the red cinema, whatever it's called, the baby screenings. So you take your kid along, and the lights are a bit higher and the sound's down a little bit, and they played Peterloo. And we literally, and obviously he slept through the whole thing. It's not like he was traumatized by the cutlasses and all that shit. But I just remember being like, only afterwards I thought, that's a bit weird. It's like they had Peterloo as a baby screening.
That's such a funny socialist Mancunian dad thing to do to your kid.
And it kind of felt like that as well. There was kind of a sense of pride sat in the cinema a bit, when at least when the final sequence is done really, really well. But yeah, the rest of it's a load of old shite.
If you want to read some stuff about decent political reform movements, you read about people in Birmingham. They had honestly, Birmingham was the heart of the, in my opinion, of the lead up to the Great Reform.
We should say at this point that even though you may not sound like it, Rich is sort of from Birmingham.
Yeah, I'm sort of from Birmingham. Yeah, I'm from nearby. That it's a waste of time telling you what bit of the middle of nowhere I'm actually from. Yes.
Well, we'll get to the heart of the who died more frequently in fighting oppression in Manchester or Birmingham debate after our main topic. But we should probably circle around to that now. So the reason I've got Matt and Rich on to talk this week is I thought we could look at a album that we all have thoughts about. It's only the second show we've done actually after me and Rich's one on the Pixies way back that it's kind of has a musical focus really. And I've got Matt and Rich on both because they're fans of this band, but also because they're both been involved in playing music in the past and music production and things like that. So they've got some thoughts on that I don't have because I'm not involved in that kind of thing. But yeah, I want to talk to them about the Radiohead album "Hail to the Thief," which came out in summer 2003. So it's 18 years old now, basically almost.
Jeez.
Just quickly before we get onto that, I sort of want to get both of your background with Radiohead. So, Rich, I mean, how did you encounter Radiohead, and kind of briefly, if you can, what did they kind of mean to you when Hail to the Thief came around?
They meant everything when Hail to the Thief came around, which is why I'm still so fond of it, because it was my Radiohead album. So, when I was slightly younger, so I would have been 16 when it came out. And pretty much everything that had come before it, I was slightly too young for, and I didn't really have any sort of cool music friends who liked cool music. I just had Radio 1, so I knew Radiohead were a big band, I knew that the release of the previous two records, Kid A and Amnesiac, had been greeted with a lot of fanfare, a lot of anticipation, and generally been a disappointment to the mainstream press, which is the only press I had access to at the time. But I hadn't been there for it. I just knew it was happening. It wasn't my stuff. Around the turn of the century, I started getting into what you might call alternative rock on my own terms, and then, having established myself as a Radiohead fan, gone through the back catalogue, Hail to Thieves coming out. So it's the first one that's coming out while I'm a fan. So I was very, very excited because felt like it was my one. That's, yeah.
Mm. And Matt, where were you with Radiohead in 2003, and how had you got there?
I think, as Rich said, it was definitely our Radiohead album, as I'm talking about me and you, David, in terms of that. OK Computer had always been around. It felt like anyway. Obviously, it came out in '97, but it was probably about the time that me and you became music conscious. It was in our dad's CD collection. Our dad had a huge wall of CDs and vinyl, so it was just one of these things that just for us felt like it always been there. So when Hell's Thief came out, it felt like new music from a band that you'd just begun to love. And that's kind of the way that I feel about it. And I think that I'd already started to because I picked up a guitar in about 2002, very early 2002, maybe late 2001, and already started to play OK Computer riffs and stuff like that. So I was very aware that they were a guitar band to me. They were sort of an indie band, and I think I think I have to really ask you the same question, David, because I think that anything you did, I probably came off the back of that in terms of discovery and how you came to find them and stuff. So yeah, what's the story?
Well, I think for me, you both talked about that being the sort of album you came to as the new Radiohead album when you were primed for, that you were anticipating and ready for in that sense. I think for me, Kid A was kind of more that because I actually came to Radiohead. I've mentioned this before in previous podcasts, but I came to Radiohead through Now albums initially, basically because I got Now 37 and Now 38 were kind of the first ones I properly listened to. I think that would be 97 or early 98. Yeah, tail end of 97. And Now 37 has Paranoid Android on it. Now 38 has Karma Police on it. And
wow.
Now 39 has No Surprises on it. And
did they have them shoved to the back of the albums, or were they like at the front of the track listings? I can't remember.
They were sort of classic disc 2 stuff on
on
the Now album, so they were the kind of edgier indie stuff, but they were still. It was kind of as remarkable as I think I've mentioned this before, but Now 39 also has No Surprises and This Is Hardcore by Pulp on it, and which is just ridiculous.
Wow.
But I really, Karma Police in particular. Actually, I remember that was just like more advanced sonically and atmospherically and more eccentric than any kind of pop music that had been put under my nose at that time, really. So I was fascinated by that.
Karma Police was pretty much an eye-opener for me as well, because even though I was from a family who bought Now albums and stuff, Mum was sort of the curator of which tracks would be skipped in the car and that kind of, or fast-forwarded through. So even though you always surprised me about some good stuff that was on Now albums, I never heard it. So Kid A obviously was OK Computer was clearly a massive album, but not one that really got into our house. But you couldn't really avoid it because it was on the background all the time. It was used in it would occasionally be on chart shows on television that you'd catch the end of. But I wasn't really registering it. So all I knew when I was, say, turn of the century, say, year 2000, when I would have been 13, was Radiohead were a really, really big band, and I couldn't name you a song they made, and they were weird. The kind of weird that my parents don't listen to them. I don't know what they're like, but I know it must be something advanced. And then when I started getting into alternative music, if you want to call it that, when I was about 14, 15, I knew Radiohead were a band I had to go to, and Karma Police was the first song I heard of theirs, and it was like remembering something that I hadn't ever learnt. I don't know how to best describe it. The bit at the end where it goes into the finale, the dun 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 boom for a minute, that bit, I felt like I'd heard that 1,000 times. But so that I associate that that lead up to the final bit as being my pathway into Radiohead.
It's almost like it could be by Queen or something. It's kind of it's got such an anthemic vibe to it. I guess maybe it's feels like some other kind of stadium anthemic rock that you might have heard before, perhaps.
I think it must just have been the case that in 1997, say that song was on the radio a lot, or that song was on telly a lot.
OK Computer was very mainstream, wasn't it? In terms, it was their first super mainstream album.
Yeah. So it was very mainstream, but My Family was really, really, really mainstream. So even sort of the edgy end of mainstream, we didn't listen to. And I didn't go to that kind of school either, where I didn't have any friends like David who would say, "Oh, there's a cool album you should listen to." I didn't. We were all pretty square. But so I think I just must have heard it before, and it felt like remembering it. But this is a long way of saying that Karma Police is also my way into Radiohead.
I think one thing about Karma Police, welcome back to the Karma Police podcast, but I think one thing about Karma Police is it's quite Beatlesy in its kind of atmospherics and ambition, because I was thinking it reminds me a little bit of something like I'm the Walrus, and that's especially the rundown at the end, the way it's kind of like it's consciously artificial, the way the record runs down at the end, and the backing vocals draw attention to themselves as well, and it's kind of
it's like more advanced Beatles production, isn't it?
Yeah, it's like a record nerd song, isn't it? Kind of, it's very consciously like that. And it's interesting, actually, Rich, you were saying, like, me, the sort of idea of me as like the cool friend who'd introduce people to that. I'd say actually when Kid A came out in the year 2000, I was very much not that at all, even to the extent that I was more like that sort of stereotype when Hail to the Thief came out, because I think, actually, Matt, you'll remember this, I think something about Kid A coming out was really interesting, because it was one of the reasons I liked Kid A so much is, not just because it's very, very good, but also it was a really weird fusion of me starting to get into more experimental and interesting stuff myself, and off my own bat and off my own reading, but it was also a weird paternal validation, because although Dad had bought the Bends and OK Computer, he'd bought them very much in the sense of being the the record record buying dad who goes into HMV with 50 quid and like does that monthly, and buys the canonical stuff. I doubt he'd listen to them more than once, like that kind of thing. They didn't really mean anything to him. Whereas you and I listening to Kid A, Dad came in and was listening to them with us, and he was like, "Oh, that's a bit like that experimental jazz from the 70s. That's a bit like what do you call it, Weather Report or AMM and things like that, and he didn't know much about kind of like the sort of contemporary warp stuff they were drawing influence from and things like that, like your Aphex Twins and your Otekras and stuff, but he did know about the older stuff that they were drawing on, and I remember and
he was a fan of Orbital and Underworld, so I suppose that general trance, like what would you call it?
There's some krautrock stuff in there as well, isn't there, which was why my dad would have liked Kid A.
Yeah, you said it. I think your dad's probably actually was more into that than our dad, but our dad would have been on the fringes of some of that stuff, and our dad liked King Crimson and things like that,
Correct.
Yeah. But I think it's interesting, isn't it, Matt? Because Matt, you'll remember, because it's funny, isn't it? Because Kid A has one of the boldest things about Kid A, just in a marketing sense, was it didn't have any singles at a time when that still kind of mattered,
Yeah.
But do you remember, like, we'd listen to things like the national anthem on Kid A, and Dad would you can imagine some dads coming in and going like, "What is this rubbish?" And our dad came in and he was like, "What is this rubbish? Why is it ending? It's only been 7 minutes, or something."
Yeah.
He was like, "It's just getting going,
The sort of sax solo, isn't it, at the end, like towards the end. I'm sure Dad absolutely loved that stuff, and like you say, why isn't this going on for another 18 minutes? Like, an album of improvised funk. But I think it's I'd like to say at this point as well, when I mentioned that the OK Computer being in the CD collection, like you just said, David, that point when you were a kid and you're sort of pulling stuff off shelves and looking at it, just exploring things for just what they are physically. I remember pulling off the I remember taking the Bends off the shelf and being quite shocked by the image on the front, that sort of elongated face. So that really stuck with me. That's a powerful album cover. And I remember saying, "What's that?" "Oh, it's Radiohead, the Bends." And "What's the Bends?" "Oh, it's when you go diving and you come up and you die." And I was like, "Ah!" So it was quite shocking in that way. And obviously the OK Computer art isn't as memorable maybe, but that is also, I just remember that being in there and thinking that's something a little bit edgy.
That's a fun adolescent thing, isn't it? That where you learn things from albums. Either from album titles or covers or the lyrics and the focuses of the bands and stuff. Where you actually kind of, they're both trying to impart this stuff, but you're exactly the age where you can kind of get something out of it, and that's in a sort of intellectual sense. It
was the first time I'd heard of a yellow submarine, if you can believe it.
Mind blown.
Yeah.
I remember trying to recreate the OK Computer cover on Microsoft Paint. That's a late, probably like late 90s memory. I'd love
to see that now.
Oh, it was a mess. Yeah, it was a state. I had more luck with Screamadelica because I suspect they did it on Microsoft Paint. But yeah, I mean, talk about Kid A a little bit. We'll circle back to Hail to the Thief maybe more in detail after a short break. But after Kid A, obviously the Amnesiac came out within a year of it, didn't it?
Yeah.
And very much in a way where they weren't trying to hide that this material was from the same recording session, so it was kind of like could be a kind of off cut, it could be a stuff that wasn't good enough to go on Kid A kind of thing.
So steal this album.
Yeah. I think a lot of, I know that was the critical take from the mainstream press at the time, from the bunch of people who weren't that impressed by Kid A in the first place, who were wrong. That Kid A was slightly too weird anyway, and this is the stuff that wasn't good enough for Kid A. But I know that the Radiohead want to think of them as sort of sister albums, don't they? It's just how I think about them the correct way.
It's funny because I had a short conversation with Matt the other night, and he was asking me what my favourite Radiohead album was, and I basically, only thinking about it for a few seconds, I was like, probably Amnesiac, but then I was like, I'm aware that there's probably a part of me that's saying that because Kid A is too obvious an answer,
That's the problem I have.
Yeah.
I will always hedge my bets and say I think Kid A is the best album quite easily, I say that, but I also know that a lot of critics say that. So then but my personal favourite is Hail to the Thief for the reasons we're going to discuss shortly. But I also think that's a lie. I think Kid A is my favourite.
I think Kid A is perfect in a way that because we'll talk a little bit about track lengths and like kind of the size, the bloat of albums when we talk about Hail to the Thief. Kid A is just that straight 10 tracks, isn't it? I think on the vinyl it is just 5 tracks per side, and it's there's something so neat about that, as well as arguably all the tracks being essential as well. On Kid A, and even Amnesiac's a little bit longer, isn't it? I'm not sure about runtime, but this Amnesiac stretches to 11 tracks, I think, doesn't it?
I think for me, it's a bit of I think it's more of a standard answer than Kid A is probably OK Computer is my favourite album because, not least because it has my favourite song on it, which is Let Down. That's always been my favourite Radiohead song, and I think it's my funeral song. It's like that's how much I love it. Just FYI. But I just, but no, and it's difficult because
think it's very flattering that you think that you'll die before me.
Yeah, it's the way you've got to live your life, But it's definitely I sort of thought to myself, is it my favourite album just because it has my favourite song on it? Because that's not really a good enough reason. But that I've grown to, and it used to be, it was the Bends for a while. It's never actually been Kid A or Amnesiac, I have to say. I think it's gone from Hail to the Thief, it went to the Bends, and now it's settled on OK Computer. So it's jumped around a bit over the last decade. Yeah.
It's interesting you've settled so much on Let Down as a favourite, isn't it? Because you're because there's some fans obviously who only like Radiohead's more sort of trad stuff, you might say, sort of everything up to OK Computer and the end of OK Computer, and have actually ignored or were put off by Kid A and Amnesiac. And you're not one of those fans. Like you have listened to all of Radiohead stuff, but you still have gravitated ultimately back towards not shunning that stuff, but you still like the more traditional stuff because Let Down kind of could be on the Bends, really, couldn't it? It's not even that.
There's a sort of an electronic effect at the end with that sort of glittery, starry play out at the end. Which is beautiful. I'm going to cry even talking about it, but that's pretty much it. Like you say, the rest of it is guitar, bass, drums with some simple effects on it. Nothing really that synthesized at all. So yeah, it is more traditional. That's part of my love for the Hail to the Thief is obviously we're coming out of the other side of an indie electronic band, and I think that Hail to the Thief is a perfect blend of both.
Right.
It's like they came out, taking the elements that they did from Kid A and Amnesiac, mixing it with their sort of more traditional indie style.
Yeah.
Can I just tell you a very quick story about?
Absolutely, yeah.
Sorry. I've seen Radiohead twice. Is that right? Twice. Yeah, twice. The first time was at Leeds Festival, one of the best gigs of my life. Incredible. The second one was just after.
When was that? When
was Leeds? You're gonna, if you can Google the lineup, I'm pretty sure it was 2009. I'm almost definite 8 or 9. I think it's 9. The second time was they were due to play the arena, but the Manchester bomb happened. So they had to basically amalgamate 2 nights of, which was going to be 2 nights of Radiohead, and put it at the Lancashire Cricket Club instead, because obviously they were still, rebuilding the arena and so on. So it was very exciting still. We still thought, it's not quite as good a venue, but we're still excited to go. And obviously it was summer, it was June, I think, June or July.
Should say Old Trafford Cricket Club is within walking distance of our mum's house of where we grew up.
It's very, very close. It was very communal. It felt like they were playing in your neighbourhood. It was lovely, and we went down. We had a beer at the pub, but there was all this kind of thing, like the quadrant, just a few 100 yards away from the venue, and the rumours start. We thought they were on at 7:30, say, at 8, sorry, and then someone said they're on at 7:30. They're on at 7:30. And everyone's like, what? Where are you getting that from? It's like, no, that's what's happening. And it was really confused. Like, there was hundreds of people literally looking around going, what, really? Like, no one knew what was correct, what was going on. Even on the tickets, I think it was really vague, as to what time they actually started. So we started rushing to get there. And there was obviously, because of the aftermath of the bombing, there was loads of security, like dogs and fences and gates and obviously, metal detectors and all that stuff. So it took, half an hour to get through when it normally would have taken about 10 minutes to get into the venue. We get into the concourse area and we're like, right, we need a beer. Like, what are we going to do? Like, what's we going to do first, sort of thing. And I just hear, transport, motorways and tram. I'm like, oh, they're playing Let Down on the PA system. And then I went, they're playing Let Down. They've started the concert with my favourite fucking song, and we're stood here in a stinky concourse needing a piss. And even by the time we get over the stairs to get into the venue, it's going to be over. So I stood there with literally holding my head, just like I could barely hear it. It was muffled, shitty sound quality coming over. And so my point is, it should have been the best gig in the world. It instantly turned into the worst because. We went in there and, the rest of the set was fine, like it was all right. The sound wasn't particularly good. They didn't have extra speakers at the back of the crowd. So, it wasn't like particularly great sound. Yeah. And just stood there. Basically, I just couldn't get over that. And so it turned and just a little preface this, they hadn't played Let Down for something like 18, 20 years in their live set. And it would have been, can you imagine, like, for me, how amazing that would have been? So, yeah, that's my...
And that's a long-winded way of saying that's why you did all them murders.
Yeah. Yeah, basically. So it was, but that's just, I think that's just proof of how much I love them, man.
Oh, that's a great shame. I saw Radiohead, I think Isabel, who's been on the show, would be able to correct me on this, but I think it was at the V Festival back in about 2006, so 3 years after... maybe 2005, but 3 years after, 2 or 3 years after Hail to the Thief, anyway. And it was that phase. Do you remember when they were doing, like, to some comment, they were doing Creep for the first time in ages? Like, they were starting to do Creep at the end of concerts, and I think that's when I saw them. That's what they did, basically.
Like the final encore.
That's what they were going to do. Yeah, it's it was like a thing. It was like a statement that they were reconciling with their past, which actually we might talk about in terms of Hail to the Thief as well. But just briefly, Richard, I think we'll take a short break in a sec. But have you seen Radiohead, and in what circumstances?
No. And,
wow.
Yeah, well, no, it's sort of a...
God, my stories must seem really trivial to you, then. I'm sorry.
No, it is kind of sore, because so when Hail to the Thief came out and they were touring that, I'll go back a step. I've had tickets to see Radiohead in my hand. I've had them about 3 or 4 times.
What?
And by a conspiracy of circumstance, never been able to go.
Are you kidding?
And I can remember 3 reasons, although one's a bit muddled. So the first I was at school in about 2003, that summer, or maybe even a year later. I don't quite remember. I was definitely at school. Had tickets to see them, and it was something like the only place nearby that the nearest place in the UK they were going to us was Nottingham. So that's about an hour away from us. It's not too bad, but it was a school night, and we had to find a way to go there and come back. Now, the reason I'm sort of pausing a little bit, because there's a very similar story from around the same time with McCluskey, where I had tickets to go. It was somewhere that was difficult to get to, and I couldn't go. So this might actually be the story about McCluskey, but anyway, we'll make it Radiohead for the purposes of drama. And basically, me and my mates were like, we just can't go. We just can't go to Nottingham. So we don't. So I sell the ticket to someone else in school who can drive, and he goes. He's in the year above me. Next day, come in, and they'd all managed to go. Apart from me.
Oh man!
Basically, I think somebody had realised that one of my mates' sister was at Nottingham Uni, so we can crash on her floor, that kind of thing. And they'd all gone and come back on the same night. And I was absolutely gutted. Second time was I'd been at uni in Scotland, and they were playing in Glasgow, and again I had a ticket, and we just couldn't, for whatever reason, get to Glasgow. Second time would have been, third time would have been something similar. I think when we were in Edinburgh, maybe in London, I had tickets to go see them, something like that. Just couldn't go.
You sort of forget this from a position of relative settled privilege. You sort of forget how difficult it often was to just get to places in your teens and early 20s, don't you? Like,
yeah, for someone who didn't drive, was completely broke. Just getting to I remember living in St Andrews, which is a small town in East Scotland. Getting to Edinburgh, which is an hour and a bit away, was just such a nightmare because public transport was dog shit. But also, it was expensive, and I couldn't afford to get trains places in my early 20s.
That's it. Like when you think about festivals and gigs and stuff, you have to add on like at least £100 for travel. On top of a really expensive ticket as well. It's not easy.
And I had no driving mates. But I think eventually, I hit the point where I thought this is never going to happen, and it also coincided with that sort of period around that time, again to do with money. But I sort of fell off the cultural cliff, and that's why for 10 years I've been very, very backward, and I don't know what's happening in the world culturally now, including Radiohead. I think that will emerge towards the end of the conversation, as I don't really know what they're doing anymore, which makes me feel very sad.
Yeah, we'll have a little talk about our sort of relationship with them post Tales to the Thief. We'll talk a little bit about how much any of us have engaged with that, and what some of our highlights of that might be.
Preview. Don't be that sad, Rich.
Yeah. Let's take a short break now because I need to get a glass of water, and we'll play a clip of something Radiohead did around that time in the break. But we'll reconvene shortly. We'll talk more about the album and the tracks, and I'm going to start you off with the NME review from the time. See you in 5 minutes.
Do you think that the Hail to the Thief album, getting on to the next one, is a political album, not a protest album? And the music is very joyful. I think the music's very up.
Yeah, I don't know.
But protest
is too close to that one.
Is protest? You're too close to it, really.
Still,
yeah. In what the album is saying, in what you say.
No, I never had a problem with. I never had a problem with the political bit. Really, my favourite one was always Gloaming because.
Which you were going to call the album, or wanted to for at least 5 minutes.
Yeah, 10 actually. Probably should have done, actually, but there you go. Hey-ho. What do you know?
Incidentally, Tom, you mentioned Nigel Godrich as in producer, right? Okay, that's fine. But, he wasn't the producer of this album at first. When you got these songs together, were they already all together with somebody else? And you brought them to Nigel, and were they so together that he couldn't Nigel them?
No. Oh, no. They were Nigeled.
Were they Nigeled, yeah?
Yeah, because, we just lost our way completely.
That's pretty scary.
Yes, it was.
Can you not work without him, then?
No.
OK, let's put it this way. Is your solo album a solo album, or is it you and Nigel?
Yes, me and Nigel, absolutely.
Right, so it's not a solo.
Because... no, exactly. Because, it's it's that thing of, given the choice, I would never finish anything. Myself, personally.
It's true.
So you can't work alone?
Well, it depends if you want me to finish something or not.
So do you think in some ways now, just finally on that whole thing, that you have opened a whole new virtual world? Like the virtual store is now open for business?
No.
No?
No.
First, what is it? It's like man going on the moon, but the next time he does it is 50 years later. Hold on a second, that's a good first step, but this is not necessarily the model.
It was our response to what was going on. Do we, A, go back into the system as it stands, take a wad of cash and admit defeat, or whatever you want to call it, or do we go along with the way things are, given the fact that so much of the Radiohead sort of fan base is on the net and very active, and we've always really sort of enjoyed that element of things. It wasn't that hard a choice, really.
No. I think, as well, there's the feeling that what's great about it is that ability to change and move. The problem with a record contract per se is that, if you're signed for 6 records, that framework stays with you, and it's very different. That band that starts is very different from the band sort of 10 years later. So the things that you have to do don't necessarily sit comfortably with you. We found that, after OK Computer, Kid A, we didn't want to do interviews. We didn't really. We'd sort of stepped into that world, and we didn't feel comfortable with it. We were trying to find something else. So what's great about this way, is that it was just a response then, and when we bring out our next record, it will be something different.
But the thing about it is also, like, if for example, you know, now that we're sort of writing songs at the moment, if we were thinking to ourselves, well, is this another one in 6 records, or this is, you know, if we weren't stimulated by the idea of how it could come out, or how it could, you know, like how it would be put up, if we weren't stimulated by the whole process, we wouldn't carry on, because there's no point. If it was like, we are the little creative people in the box, thank you very much, we give you our missive, at the end of it you say thank you very much, you write a cheque, you send them away. We can't do that. There's no point in us carry on if that's the way things are.
Sure, but does it have to be the way it is? Does it have to be always some kind of, like, you know, approaching acting like the method acting kind of way, and have to be kind of some sort of torturous route? I mean, like, some of the times that you've mentioned the music that you've liked the most, Ed, is going back to early 90s and that whole rave scene, and you've described a few things that you were at, be it Happy Mondays here, or be it Stone Roses there, and everything else in between, and just to get out there and do it and get by in a funky rhythm, it takes too long to do it.
I think that
party.
Yeah, but you see, they're not working in a vacuum. We were in the past few years, we've been working in a vacuum. That's how it feels.
Yeah.
They're part of a scene. We're not part of anything. We're bloody, you know.
But you were never part of anything.
No,
even when you might have been dragged into Britpop, when Creep was becoming big, you were over in the States doing stuff, and you missed all that.
I know,
but
OK Computer, sorry, the Bends was our response to Britpop, completely.
Yeah.
And OK Computer was our response to hanging out with REM on tour, you know. And and Kid A and Amnesiac was a response to my utter obsession with everything that didn't involve guitars. And, you know, Hail to the Thief was not as much a response to things musically, and then by the time we got to this, we felt completely isolated.
Well, Hail to the Thief was also, at the time, that was an attempt to make a record where we all got on. And it was harmonious. The problem with that record, I think we feel is, or personally and some of us do, is that it wasn't edited very well.
No, we didn't spend enough time. We didn't
spend enough time. And so you get to a stage when everybody gets on fine, but then you have to edit it, and that's when disagreement comes, because you all have different opinions. So we didn't go there.
Welcome back to the show. I just wanted to quickly refer to this NME review of Hail to the Thief that I came across online, archived, just to sort of start the conversation about the album properly. We can talk a little bit about kind of it sounds awful, doesn't it? The mainstream music press and how they reacted to Radiohead during this period in a bit, because I know you've got thoughts on that. So this is a review that's from the time, and it's from the NME, and it's from James Oldham, and they give Hail to the Thief in 2003 a 3.5 star review, 3.5 out of 5 star review. And I just want to, I should say, actually, this is not to rubbish the review in general, because actually it goes on to make points about Hail to the Thief that I largely agree with, and even in terms of some of the tracks it picks out and stuff like that. So I won't read out that bit, because we'll sort of cover a lot of that as well. But I agree with a lot about this review, but it's interesting that it comes at it from a completely different angle than I would. So I'm just going to read out the first few paragraphs here to give you an idea of where we might differ here. So the reviews, quote, "When OK Computer, Radiohead's third album, swept aside all competition in 97's end-of-year polls, it did so for a good reason. Not only was it a toweringly complex and beautiful record, but alongside releases from Spiritualized and Primal Scream, it also seemed to point to a new spirit of adventurous and experimentalism after the musical primitivism of Britpop. Of course, it's already been extensively debated that this was both a blessing and a curse for Radiohead. On one hand, it propelled them towards becoming one of the biggest bands in the world, but on the other, it confused their creative process to such an extent that when Kid A finally appeared 3 years later, it seemed they'd lost sight of what made them such an exceptional band in the first place. Being simply a rock group no longer appeared to be enough. They now had to prove they were serious experimentalists as well. Unfortunately, as Radiohead had proved over the course of both Kid A and its successor, Amnesiac, they're a much better rock band than they are an experimental one. If you play those two records now, you're immediately drawn to the moments where the band are at their most conventional. Songs like Knives Out, the National Anthem, ? From me, and Pyramid Song. The electronic pieces, ultimately diluted takes on the superior work of artists like Otekra and Aphex Twin, served simply as distractions. Prior to release, speculation hinted that Hail to the Thief would mark a return to the more conventional dynamics of the Bends and OK Computer. That always sounded like wishful thinking, and so it proves. Hail to the Thief is a direct continuation of the direction pursued post OK Computer.
What?
And it finds the band at a creative impasse. In their attempts to pay lip service to both their experimental and traditional impulses, they're stuck in a no man's land between the two. So, I mean, apart from that, there's a few contradictions in that review. in the start of that review, they seem to say the author seems to say that experimentalism is both the best thing about Radiohead and the thing they shouldn't do at all.
I think they also either in bad faith or because they're stupid, which I don't believe necessarily either of those things, conflate how accessible this person finds the music with how experimental it is, or how unexperimental it is. So the question mark you quite rightly put in there about a national anthem being a conventional rock song. Well, what he means is it's kind of got catchy bits, but other than that, it's not remotely. It has a sort of free jazz breakdown in it. What's conventional about that? Basically, but it's got a hook. So he goes, that's songwriting. I don't know. There were so many points. I should have made notes as you went along that I could go through each one. I think every single point.
It's not just opinion; it's literally false.
It's just factually incorrect.
As I say, the review goes on to actually make judgments about the tracks on Hail to the Thief that I actually largely could get with. It's more the fact he's coming out from a completely different starting point, isn't it? Because he interestingly he sort of sees like Kid A and Amnesiac as the start of Radiohead wandering in the desert looking for a direction, right? Whereas you could more conventionally and probably more accurately you could say Hail to the Thief is that.
Yeah, Hail to the Thief is them. Yeah. Having had the sort of enlightenment moments of Kid A and Amnesiac, which I know the mainstream press didn't like, and we'll come to that in a minute. But Hail to the Thief is that it's coming back home changed and not really fitting in anymore.
That's the way I've always felt about it. Was that the Kid A and Amnesiac were in like a completely different direction, but this is kind of an amalgamate of both styles in a lot of ways, and I can see why they lost fans or people kind of got a bit pissed off with the sort of electronic direction, because it isn't for everybody. But at the end of the day, it's the same composers making those electronic pieces. It's just the tools are different. So it never bothered me. I did think it was. Don't get me wrong. There's a lot of days where I'm not in the mood for that style, and I'd rather have the Ben style. But however, it's still there's still a lot of tracks on those albums that nearly bring me to tears. It's still the emotions the same.
I've just thought of a slight parallel between some of the reviewers at the time and still to this day, and how my mum thinks about music, which is in a completely different world. Like so my mum thinks that she's really into music, but she likes happy sort of weddingy music, things you can dance to and tap your feet to and get up. And if your song doesn't do that, then you've made a mistake. It goes without saying, quite another, that we were all aiming for that. And then when you say to her things like, "No, Mum, I didn't even want that," and the composer of this piece didn't even want that to happen. That wasn't even in my mind. She regards it as a kind of mealy-mouthed bit of obfuscation. Yeah. Like, of course, everyone wants music to be happy and dancey. Whereas I think the parallel being here that of course everyone wants music to be kind of anthemic post U2 guitar rock. I mean, that's a given. So the fact that Radiohead are doing that with a different palette, then what they were aiming for with Kid A must have been an electronic version of stadium rock, which they obviously failed to do. And there doesn't seem to be any appreciation that that's not even what they were trying to do.
I think that's your mum's sort of take on it is kind of like a very extreme version of what a lot of people would think, in lesser ways. But I've got an example of there's Atoms for Peace, that like side project Tom York did. Was it with Flea? And there's a track called Ingenue that they did, which was it would be at home on Kid A or Amnesiac, and however Tom York did a piano version of it on the Jonathan Ross show. And it's still one of my favourite tracks, and I don't particularly care for the electronic version. However, I know now, hearing the straight piano version that is very 4/4, very kind of like conventional, that's what the roots of the song are. So as I was saying before, it doesn't really, for me, take away from the band's style the fact that they're just using different tools to do the same type of songs. Because I wouldn't say that it's a bit of a you get my point. Like Kid A and Amnesia aren't not Radiohead. You know, they are very much Radiohead. They're just using different tools to create similar songs, if that makes sense.
Well, it's like, you know, I can't remember if it was Rich or yourself, Matt, who pointed out that OK Computer, when we started paying attention to Radiohead, was canonical in a way that it belied how new an album it was. Like, and I remember that. I remember it featuring in best of album lists in the magazines and on TV coverage and on the radio and stuff, in a way that it felt like it was the rock of ages, right? It felt like it had been around forever, and it really, really hadn't, as I say. And it was weird. It was contradictory for me because, as I say, I've been experiencing it as pop music released through Now albums at the same time. You know, so I knew that wasn't true. I knew it was fresh. The paint was barely dry. But people really treated it like that, didn't they? Like a top 20 all-time album that was up there with like Pet Sounds, you know, and kind of set in stone before its follow-up had even been released.
It literally slotted in there immediately, didn't it? You know, like with the top albums, top 5 albums of all time, and you know, it was in there pretty much from its release, which is impressive.
What always annoyed me about it, we'll get back to Health of Eve, sorry, we're struggling to stick to it, but what annoyed me about that kind of anti-Kid A faction was, can you imagine how disappointed people really would have been if they'd done OK Computer Part 2? Like, in reality, people would have said it's you know, you're trying to capture lightning in a bottle twice, you know.
That would have been the tragedy, yeah.
I'm not quite sure, because I think that if they had done that, it still would have been really good because they're very, very talented. It would have been very, very good, a very good album. And people on our end of the critical spectrum, if we can be generous enough to call us critics, we'd have been disappointed. But I can imagine two reactions. One, which is the yes, more of this is great. This is how, you know, this is how music should be. It's perfected, and let's move on. And then a kind of duplicitous negative reaction to people who were kind of like, well, I was there first time and I got it. I gave it a nice. I gave OK Computer a 10 out of 10 review originally. So now, I can use this as a sort of point score, childish point scoring.
I mean, like, would a guitar band version of Idiotech be just as good? You know, it's the same lyrics, it's the same substance. You know, it's like it's just a drum kit instead of a patch bay or whatever, instead of a, you know, what you call those pads, pads, yeah. But it's, you know, that's the interesting thing, isn't it? I think that, you know, would it really have been such a tragedy? To me, it feels like Richard said, that probably would have been judged harsher in a lot of ways. However, if the songs were basically the same sentiment, you know, they had the same lyrics and so on, the same structure, would it have been? They're still great songs.
Well, we wouldn't have. The thing is, we weren't expecting a Kid A in that sense, were we? We wouldn't have known we'd missed it, you know, in this parallel universe. So, I mean, when you listen to Everything in its Right Place and those chords descend, I think we get a bit, you know, quasi-mystical about this, but I think, you know, something has changed in that moment, you know, and we just wouldn't have had that moment. So,
yeah, you do.
I think, you know, not to over romanticize Kid A, but it's quite a different thing, isn't it? And I think when you've had a Kid A moment, like for us, it was the Kid A, you know, but it points you towards different things in other art that you appreciate as well, doesn't it? Because it makes you think that artistic left turns are at least a direction worth taking, because they sometimes yield fruit like this. So it's kind of
and it's kind of a bit of a, you know, it's a strange thing to say, but I also kind of knew they would get out of it as well. You know, I didn't think this was now Radiohead. You know, I just felt like it was a sort of a just taking things in a different direction temporarily. It never felt like I never thought to myself, this is Radiohead from now on.
It was always going to be cumulative, wasn't it? Like, Radiohead now, whatever they're doing now, will be the sum of their alternative rock beginnings, their electronic warp experimentations of the early 2000s, and whatever they did since.
The anthemic sing-alongs, you know, the lighter in the air stuff.
Yeah,
you know,
it'll be some of that. It'll be all Johnny Greenwood sort of sort of modern contemporary classical stuff that he does, his film scores and that kind of stuff. It'll be the sum of all those. It'll be the sum of all those things.
Yeah. Every track will now have Humphrey Littleton on it. That's the great betrayal they made of me.
Oh yeah, obviously it goes to that. Yeah.
I got Hail to the Thief and I was like, where's Littleton?
Well, Littleton knew he'd peaked with.
That's why he died.
In the glass house, so yeah.
Oh man, yeah, they should have started using that as the theme tune. So I'm sorry, I haven't a clue. I wanted, so getting on to Hail to the Thief, just quickly.
Yeah, we probably should.
Yeah, going. Yeah, no, we will talk about the tracks in detail as well.
Yeah.
But going back to because we'll talk a bit about the re-listen this time. Going back to the summer of 2003, because it came out in June 2003, I believe. And this was their last label album, wasn't it? Was it EMI? What was your reaction, Rich, in the summer of 2003 to Hail to the Thief?
Well, because it had come off because the lead single was There, which is obviously a banger, I was very, very happy. So I was already positively disposed because of that kind of great single. Also, this is my, like I said earlier, this was going to be my Radiohead album, so I have to stick up for it. So again, more positive disposition. And also the fact that at that time I probably I was quite confused about the critical landscape that Radiohead were in, because I was still quite young and coming into the world of like my own taste in music and not knowing what that meant. So I didn't know what. So the fact that it did have more guitars in it, I thought, well, that is. Well, I've just read an NME review that tells me this is the best thing about it, so it probably is. And that makes it more accessible. Like it had more touchstones that I recognised as because I wasn't really into electronic music at that point. So yeah, I liked it a lot. I did find it. I mean, again, I didn't have the words for this, but a bit bloated, and there were some ideas that lingered around too long. Like there was the thing that struck me about the re-listen was just the length of tracks with not that many ideas in them. But again, those aren't the words that I would have used at the time. I just stuck up for it and thought, yeah, this is a Radiohead album. It's mine, so it's cool.
And what was your reaction at the time in 2003, Matt? And how has that changed, if at all, on this listen?
Well, I mean, as I said, I was already playing Radiohead riffs on the guitar and the bass and stuff. You know, the sort of more like OK Computer like riffs and stuff like that. So I was already a huge fan, and I think I'd already discovered Let Down. I think I listened to OK Computer every night for about a year. You know, I mean, literally, you know, just had it on as I was going to sleep, sort of thing. And then my friend Max came back from Glastonbury and said, I'm in love. And I was like, what? And he's like, I've seen Radiohead live. It was the best experience of my entire life. And then he became an obsessive, you know, about Radiohead. So again, it was that kind of affirmation that he likes it too. And then everyone started, you know, I have to give a lot of credit to Max really for just, you know, bigging it up. And then he started using it in these little home movies called Fields of Mischief that we used to do when we were kids, which was filming ourselves falling off skateboards and throwing up and stuff. And he used Radiohead.
This is very much in the post-Jackass landscape, wasn't it?
But yeah, exactly. Yeah, so you know, so we're doing skateboarding, getting drunk, like, you know, smoking weed and filming it all. And Max put together, you know, these. I don't want to, you know, be too melodramatic, but put together these absolutely beautiful sequences set to Sit Down, Stand Up, or, you know, off Hail to the Thief, and various. You know, there was loads of Radiohead used basically on these films, and some of the sequences he did, sped up sequences of us running around the streets of Chorlton at night with the beautiful, like, the sodium lights, you know, above us, all streaking out in long exposure. I mean, it was like a piece of art. You know, it started off as a goofy thing that we used to do, throwing up and skateboarding, and then it became. Radiohead gave it another level of kind of artistry. Max is a great artist anyway, you know, so I've got, that's a great kind of, you know, I can't think of certain songs off Healthy without seeing footage of me as a kid having the best time of my life. So it's literally directly, you know, linked. And also that same summer I saw System of a Down for the first time in their most explosive like form I've ever seen them, and it was just the best gig of my entire life, and it still is. So we had these two wonderful experiences of music coming together. So I kind of associate them to those two events, like Max seeing Radiohead at Glastonbury, me seeing System, and then Radiohead literally becoming the soundtrack to our lives, man.
It's interesting. I when Hail to the Thief came out in 2003, I was let's see, I was in the middle of sixth form, of the 2 years that followed sixth form at the end of my high school. So I was doing my I would have just done my AS levels, gearing up for my A levels, and I was having a great time. I was socially experimenting a lot, and, you know, I was falling in love for the first time that summer and things like that. It was a very hot summer 2003. I remember. I really liked Hail to the Thief, and I actually, it's funny you mentioned there, Rich. Because I was going to clubs for the first time, kind of mostly in a very kind of mainstream indie boy kind of way, you know, like I was going out, you know, Matt will remember Fifth Avenue in in Manchester, for example.
So that was like Club 101, basically, wasn't it, in Manchester?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously, for anyone who knew it then, obviously you'll remember Fifth Avenue was a kind of, you know, your bog standard indie student nightclub in Manchester. But obviously, going out to it as a 17-year-old, it's when you're not even really meant to be there. It was very exciting, and they were playing, you know, singles at that point, you know, like. You know, and I'm not meaning to compare these directly to there, obviously, but things like "Take Me Out" by Franz Ferdinand, which in its own way is trying to do, you know, sort of mainstream indie dance floor things, but change them up a little bit, and, you know, kind of it felt like quite a time when you could go to a nightclub, and even a straightforward, vanilla indie nightclub like that, and listen to some records that were coming out that were a little bit within that palette, were trying to be a little bit different. And I think Hail to the Thief, giving us There as the lead single was that, wasn't it? And then some, because I remember drunk students back in the days when you could still smoke in nightclubs and stuff, dancing to There, in a sort of nightclub that held, I don't know, Fifth House capacity was like 1,000, something like that. A packed dance floor of people dancing to Hail to the Thief and trying to flirt to There, and that is so if we start off with There as a sort of symbol of I think the best things on the album.
There is like the one where I know the track, but did they do in the live performances? They brought like 2 snare drums to the front, didn't they? And they made that like Slipknot do. They made it kind of like a part of the performance, didn't they? I think the drummer was just playing the snare. I think Johnny Greenwood had one as well. Am I right?
Yeah. And stylist, that was a bit of a declaration, wasn't it? I don't think it's funny. Like, I don't think Hail to the Thief is the album where that's the case. It's not like you can't just say that Hail to the Thief is the album that all sounds a bit like There, of which There is the biggest example. That's one of the wonderful things about it, because it is this big, crazy kind of slightly tribal, dark, melancholic, despairing dance single, isn't it? Really, it's crazy.
It's kind of the most incongruous, really, isn't it? In terms of like, they're all beautiful pieces of artwork, like in themselves, but then they all paint different pictures. But it is probably in a weird way the most mismatched album in that respect. Like, the production on each song is pretty different, isn't it? Like, it's not. There's some constants, but it's not as constant as, like, say, Kid A or the Bends, definitely.
Well, you might know more about this, Rich, but they recorded this album quite quickly, didn't they? In a recording studio in LA, apparently, and I believe a lot of them were done kind of as live, or relatively for a band like Radiohead, they would.
Well, I don't know, but I think the fact that there's some songs on it with actual live band, sort of live drumming rather than pretty much all the program drumming of the first couple of the last 2 albums. Then yeah, they could do it live. I don't actually know the circumstances of its recording. It's not something I would have remembered. Do you remember the video for There as well, which is doing all the rounds, or the stop motion shit? That was again. I remember that being released, and it being, not quite a run home. They're gonna release the There video, but I remember seeing it I do remember seeing it for the first time and thinking, it's just. There's no better way of saying it. It's just really cool.
Yeah. It was a great video.
Yeah, it was beautiful, wasn't it? It had that kind of dark, kind of Cosgrove Hall, Wind of the Willows kind of personality to it, didn't it? But much more disturbing.
And it was very much Tom York's face, wasn't it? It was a big part of it. So you felt like he was really deeply involved in it. It was.
Do you know they actually asked? I didn't know this, I think, at the time either. But did you know they asked Oliver Postgate, the Clangers Bagpuss animation genius, that they asked him to do it, and he was like, "No, I'm retired." But they went with someone basically trying to do an Oliver Postgate type thing in the actual finished video,
and they do it well as well. Yeah. What I was just thinking about what I was trying to say earlier about liking Hail to the Thief it was still the first Radiohead album that I'd listened to where I didn't love it, that there were tracks on it I didn't like. Every album before that I had loved every track on the album, and even though that was but with Kid A and Amnesiac, I sort of, the lines between tracks were weird, like particularly with Amnesiac. I think I would have listened to it a couple of times and gone, yeah, I get it. I'm not gonna, which isn't true now, obviously it's one of my favourites, but this is there were tracks on Hail to the Thief that I didn't like and didn't know what to do with that, because I'm meant to love this band. They're meant to be perfect. So I remember that sitting awkwardly with me and not wanting to talk about it. But which is what this is about. It's therapy.
I never like any new Radiohead album on the first week of listening to it. Really, I mean, I don't hate it, but I'm always think it's very mundane. Mm-hmm. But I've always taken that as a sign that with any great piece of artwork, it's going to be sort of subversive and strange and kind of like, transgressive in some way that's going to make you sort of go, oh, I don't really know. But then it soon becomes like my favourite album. Like, I remember the second or third week of listening to Hail to the Thief, it became my favourite Radiohead album for at least 5 years or something, like that. I don't know if you had a similar experience of that kind of delayed love.
Not with this one. I did with In Rainbows. I remember listening to In Rainbows once through when it came out, amid the fanfare of the pay what you want stuff, and I'm basically going, yeah, it's fine, and not listening to it. And then it was a year later, which felt like a lifetime at the time. It was a year later that I listened to it when we were living in Edinburgh, actually. so I now associate that album so much with Edinburgh. I gave it another, and then it became very, very quickly one of my favourite Radiohead albums. It's not anymore. It's now trickled away again. I think that even though I think it's better than Hail to the Thief, I like Hail to the Thief more because even though there are some misses, and I think some missteps on Hail to the Thief in the way that there aren't that many in Rainbows, the things that Hail to the Thief is trying to do, and largely succeeding, are just things that I want more music to be like. So it means more, and the whole age thing and nostalgia thing that we've discussed to death already.
You talk about Hail to the Thief maybe more than other Radiohead albums being a bit, sort of big mad collage of things. Like I mean, obviously, you both know I really like the White Album by the Beatles, for example. And kind of, I'm not saying this is quite that in terms of the variety, because the White Album was deliberately like that, isn't it? A compendium of styles, but. I think Hail to the Thief. It's funny, we talk about inessential tracks or tracks that you could possibly edit from Hail to the Thief. We'll get a bit more into that, but one of those is probably, by most people's agreement, I think probably is I Will, which just seems like this kind of like little atmosphere sketch, thing. But the actual transition from I Will into A Drunken Punch Up at a Wedding is great. It's like one of my favourite moments on the album is that ending, and it's one of the like actual segues, isn't it? It sounds like a mix,
Yeah.
It's funny you mentioned I Will. I was making a note of songs that I still love from the album, songs that I didn't like at the time but like now, and that have moved sides. And one of the ones that I moved from didn't care at the time but now really like is I Will.
Oh, interesting. Right.
It's a weird one. Like it's a weird sort of very counterintuitive journey with I Will, because at the time people were saying it's 1 minute, it's barely 2 minutes. So it's throwaway, not enough effort's gone in. But it's a shame because it's a proper it's got guitar, and it's meant to be a mid to early 2000s rock track, which is what we're all after here, and they've let us down by teasing us with why not doing it. So at the time I kind of agreed with that, I think, because I was being led by the hand, but then also slightly annoyed that it was guitar-y, and I thought you were meant to stick to your guns and be all electronic and stuff.
It's probably one of the most basic, isn't it, in its production?
Basic.
It's just one guitar and 3 voices, isn't it?
But I think the reason I like it so much now is that it succeeds in where the rest of the album fails. It's one idea, it's a chord progression, and just in 2 parts that basically lives out its life cycle and goes, well, that's it. That's all this needs to do, and moves on. Whereas so much of the rest of the album is the opposite of that. Like we will drag this out for 5 minutes with only 2 ideas.
I noticed that most with backdrifting, or where there's actually a moment in backdrifting where it goes back to the chorus when you kind of, as a Radiohead fan, are like, that's done now, and it kind of just does one more round almost. And I think even at the time in 2003, I was like, that's flab there,
Backdrift is also a song that I have an asterisk next to on my list, because when I first listened to Hail to the Thief, for years and years and years, Backdrift was my favourite song on the album. Well, at least that's what I'd say. There probably is. But every single time I go back, I'm surprised that it's like plus 5 minutes. In my head, it is a 3 minutes sort of groove, like sort of like dance groovy song, rather than this. What is it? It's something like 5.5 minutes or something.
It feels like something that's escaped from Amnesiac and been overfed to me.
Yeah. It's
You could have faded it out after the 3.5 minute mark, I think. But it's. But having said that, I kind of when I was doing the re-listen yesterday, I sort of thought, oh yeah, this is probably my least favorite track. And then as it went on, I was kind of like, do you know what? I actually kind of like this, and that kind of happened with a lot of them. Where when I heard the opening 20 seconds, I was like, oh yeah, this is one of the ones I don't particularly like. And then I got to the end of it, and I was like, gee, that's pretty good actually. It was kind of strange, but my go-to was always Scatterbrain. I just love that song. That's just beautiful. Yeah,
that's lovely.
That's probably the one that I used to play the most, and. But I think for me it's probably Scatterbrain and 2 + 2 = 5. I think how brilliant an opening is that. And I don't know if you've ever heard this before, guys, but if you turn it up really loud on that opening, you can hear I think it's Tom York saying to Johnny Greenwood, he said, "That's a nice way to start, Johnny." Yeah, that when he's doing the guitar, like the sort of not feedback, but like tapping on the pickups or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's really, really low in the track, but you can hear it, and it gives it that more, like David said, live recording garage sense to it. Which is a natural little outtake, and it's buried really deep, but you can hear it.
Radiohead are quite good at the opening track thing, aren't they?
Oh yeah.
They've got that down.
Well, they're quite good. It's 2 + 2 = 5. Is it? I wanted to talk to you about that because I'll come back to you for sort of actual, Matt sort of hinted at his there, but I'll come back to you for actual like top 3 tracks of this album.
Top 3,
but
shit.
Yeah, 3. But 2+2=5 on this re-listen and somewhat at the time is an interesting choice for an opening track, isn't it? Because I agree it's a good opening track, but I think it's and I was talking to someone on one of these previous podcasts about we use the term dated in an almost entirely negative way, whereas I think something being dated doesn't negate it. I think something being dated and very much of its time and its moment is sometimes wonderful. That's not a criticism innately. I think 2+2=5 is one of the most dated Radiohead songs, because it just in a way that actually a lot of the album isn't directly. It's tied directly to the 2003, and I guess you might say the post 2000 electoral context. And then kind of
the content,
kind of miasma of anti-George Bush, anti-Iraq war politics.
It's an anti-Bush administration. Yeah.
Well, yeah. One thing I wrote, the first thing I wrote was that the stuff that I don't really care about is I know the album is explicitly political, and at the time I think I would have cared because I was a teenager and I cared about politics, big time. But I may know here I don't care. I don't care about any of the lyrics really. I don't care about them trying. Like I've intentionally made no notes about lyrical content at all.
It's funny because the lyrics. The lyrical content of Letdown, it means nothing to me, and that's why it makes me, it kills me every time I listen to it. There's something about that not knowing which kind of makes it so much more powerful. It's not like when I listen to Letdown, I think of this. It's almost like the blankness. I think of nothing, and that's what kind of makes it like so powerful. So I think obviously there's that thing of like you can play 2+2=5. It will mean something to somebody. If you didn't know about the Bush administration, it would mean something about a breakup or, something, so it's that kind of thing. It's just,
Tom York seems to be maybe a bit unusual in terms of being a sort of, revered lead singer, lyricist, doesn't he? In the sense that he himself, you might make comparisons, more informed comparisons here, Rich, to Michael Stipe, I don't know, but, being a singer who's kind of conflicted about how much his own lyrics mean to him, really, or how much he's imparting them,
The one thing I have made about the lyrics is a negative bit, which is actually, it's not about the lyrics, it's about the vocal lines, I guess, here, is that I know that Michael Stipe's kind of lyrics is sort of that impressionistic. There's not that much sort of internal narrative coherence and that kind of stuff like that. But it is very, I think he's a very successful impressionistic lyrics. Whereas Tom York isn't. I understand that he writes with he'll just write down phrases that he likes over the course of his life and then comes to recording and then opens his notebook and then picks out random phrases. And I think that that works on Kid A and Amnesiac quite well, I think. And not too well on this album. There's quite a few bits where I went, don't do that again, Tom, where I've got a phrase that I have to get into this song that I'm lifting from my notebook. And if that involves me, syncopating and just squeezing things in, they have to get in, then they're getting in. And that, I think that stands out like a sore thumb on this record. And because it's not really a particularly ambient record, I'm not saying it hasn't got any ambience, but it's not like Kid A. The lyrical content stands out more, so you just get these kind of just clumsy phrases that can't...
The clumsy hooks that are just a little bit kind of like, we fell into a hole. Yeah, okay.
But normally I don't mind because the musical context will drag something out of that for you. And I think there's because it's quite a sparse album a lot of the time, not enough of that's going on. Anyway,
well, I mean, as well as continuing some of his sort of cut-up lyric experimentation, there's is it Wolf at the Door?
Wolf at the Door, like
close the album where he's actually it sounds awkward coming out of a white guy's mouth, doesn't it? But he's actually toasting, isn't he? I remember he's like he is just improvising lyrics into the mic at that point.
Yeah, it's just
which is probably why he ends up referencing the Phantom Flan Flinger.
Yeah,
with the flan in the face line. I should go back to this, actually. Spoilers: Wolf at the Door is actually on my top 3, so that's not a criticism, but it is something that's arguably a bit gauche.
That's one that's flipped that I used to absolutely love, and I still quite like it. But it's not my top 3. I do like it when you realise that these guys have a sense of humour, because kind of a rule I have that I can like any band ever. If they didn't make music I like, but I can only love bands with a sense of humour. And Radiohead sometimes could be accused of being a bit po-faced. That's not a critical problem. That's just my personal taste. Any song that has get the flan in the face, don't you fuck it, don't you dare flan in the face, definitely has a sense of humour. So Wolf at the Door is it does a lot of heavy lifting for them.
That's why I kind of like that little outtake at the beginning of the album, and also like whenever I've seen them live. Sorry, Rich. They've been very, between when they're playing, they're incredibly po-faced and incredibly, into it, and but when they stop and they're in between songs, they're just like, thank you, like, hey, thanks guys, how you doing? You're
they're
right.
They're quite cheery actually usually in performance, aren't they? Yeah, and like Tom York will like tease Johnny Greenwood and vice versa and things like that. It's kind
You've got some bands who come out and they say nothing. They deliberately don't interact with the crowd at all. They do the set and they walk off. It's like this is the the sort of the face of it, but no, so that's kind of nice in a way, because I think it's like the music is so emotional and so in depth, but however they are very human. These people who are making these great songs.
It's interesting. I had a thing, because after the opener of 2 + 2 = 5, which is energizing and again not like much in the album that follows it, but it then goes into Sit Down Stand Up, which. It's strange this actually, because I remember on re-listen my opinion hadn't changed much actually, and I was wondering if it had, because in 2003 I was very novice in terms of listening to sort of contemporary electronic dance music and stuff like that. I was getting into that. I was nudging in that direction. It wouldn't fully complete that for me till I actually got to university in 2005, but I was moving in that direction, listening to a lot more canonical stuff from the last few decades and things like that. But I think I sensed, and I still sense now, that Sit Down Stand Up is a kind of failure of experimentation on the album, because and again, some of that's that slight embarrassing gaucheness, I think, of it, where I think that is them. A lot of the stuff they get accused of with Kid A and Amnesiac by some more conservative music critics, I think Sit Down Stand Up actually is that, where they are reaching to try and do something that they don't quite pull off. And that comes across as like a tiny bit awkward, like not in the way that something like Idiotech is awkward and consumed with that anxiety and stuff. It's
what is it you think that they're trying to do that they fail at? Because it's not a song I love either. I just want
it comes I was going to talk a bit about Tom York's personal circumstances and stuff, because obviously he just had a young child then, and I don't mean to directly link this, although we can talk a little bit about how that might have influenced some of the sort of feel of the album and stuff. But I think in that he sounds, not to be ageist, but he sounds like a dad trying to make a dance record.
Okay, right.
There's a bit. I know it's a bit vague, but it's kind of. But it came across to me like that in 2003 as well. It wasn't. They were trying to be a bit more energetically, because I don't know the rhythms of that. Would you say they're kind of almost like drum and bass rhythms when it all kicks off at the end? Like
yeah, they don't. I'm just going from memory. They don't sound like they are sort of the complex polyrhythm stuff that they do later on, where you're not quite sure what time signature you're in.
It's just a sort of a jungle beat at the end, isn't it? like over the thing.
I always thought it was a strange one to have second, because if 2 + 2 = 5, its central dynamic is quiet, builds up, bang, loud, and it does that quite quickly. That's what Sit Down Stand Up does, but longer and more drawn out, with less of a payoff.
So do you think it's their classic kind of like they're almost trying to have 2 opening tracks?
Perhaps, yeah.
Yeah, they couldn't quite decide which one was going to be the opener, but I think it would have been nice to stick maybe Go to Sleep there or something, because like you got an opening track, then a single, and that would have been kind of cool. Or I don't know. Yeah, I'm just looking at the track list.
I think maybe they wanted to, like, having opened with a guitar song, a rock song is definitely a rock song. They wanted to let you know that actually no, we don't just do that. We do this. But again, I would have had perhaps one of the more atmospheric ambient-y ones. I mean, actually, not ambient's wrong. I keep using the word ambient. Just the more atmospheric ones. Although I think those are the ones that fail on this album as a rule.
It's funny you mentioned Go to Sleep, because Go to Sleep was a grower for me back in 2003. But and I think by the end of 2003, I really liked Go to Sleep, and on re-listen, I still really like it, both as a single and as a track. And I think Go to Sleep, you might say, is kind of. As I say, it's all over the place. Hail to the Thief. It's going in a bunch of different directions. Some of them more fruitful than others. But Go to Sleep is both a solid single, but also kind of like maybe the most successful attempt to actually create a kind of would you say like consensus Radiohead? Like kind of like it kind of ticks most of the boxes that they'd started dabbling in over the past decade.
I mean, like it's a guitar song, sort of stadium. You could at the stadium you could put your fist in the air over my dead.
And it's got those Johnny Greenwood sort of off the bends. That's very bends.
And
style.
It's got the sort of that guitar solo at the end where it's actually being plugged into some kind of bit crushing machine. It goes. So
that was a bit that often went longer in live performances. I remember.
And I love
like
those
when they were
bits.
doing TV stuff, that he did that in a much more disconcerting, like obviously out of time way and stuff.
I've no idea what that effect is, but I love it. I've actually asked a friend of mine to sort of find out for me and get it and make one. But all the tech stuff goes over my head. But yeah, using the weirdness as like sort of decoration rather than being the focus, I guess.
What do you guys think of Sail to the Moon?
Oh my god, I adore it. Absolutely adore it. It's actually one of my favourite tracks, actually, I think.
I've put that in this little column. I've put notes with arrows being a back and forth track. I don't really care about it. And I don't mean to say I don't like it. I mean, it's just because it's one that when the album came out and got lukewarm reviews from the mainstream press and mainstream critical press, and we can moan about that term later. It was one of the ones where they would say, but there's some absolute gems here. Hiding here is the stuff they should be doing. And so what you've got is essentially a piano ballad track kind of stuff, which is very kind of trad, some nice chords and stuff. So, but I always resented it's being popular because it was a symbol of what I thought was a bit of reaction in the mainstream press, from whom I wished to distance myself.
Actually, interestingly, The Enemy picks this out as the album highlight. That review I was quoting from before. As the album
I feel sheepish.
No. On re-listen, it's one of the ones that I made a note to listen to properly and try really hard to come out with fresh ears, which is obviously next to impossible. And liked it, but again, with lots of things on this album, I thought, okay, yeah, there's a nice bit here. I wouldn't have done that for that long, and I wished more stuff happened in this song than just what does.
I won't bother gushing about it then.
No, gush.
No, I don't mean that in like a, there's no point preaching or anything like that. But the reasons that I like it are just kind of purely aesthetic. There's nothing really to talk about. It's that love thing where I can't really explain why I love it so much. I just do. There's really nothing like to. So I don't mean that because you guys don't love it so much I won't talk about it. I'd just be sort of. I'd probably just start singing it after a few seconds. So
I think from a 2021 perspective, I think Tom York's vocals are really beautiful on that, and I really enjoyed sort of like lying down in the kitchen and listening to it.
I think that's what it comes down to for me, is just how much I love Tom York's voice. And when you hear a band live, even if you're watching them on YouTube and watching live sets. I think they're one of those bands that his voice is better live. When he's projecting more, it's even better. So he hits these notes that maybe in the studio were a little bit crushed and a little bit kind of like not as projected as much. But so yeah, again on that song, I feel like he's really belting it, and it just sounds great to me.
I will say that I completely agree that I have some stuff to say about his voice on this record. But I think that's one of the ones where it's just everything's perfect vocal wise. Like that arrangement with his kind of, because obviously he has a voice with a great deal of control. Like he can hit his notes and stay there, and quite a lot of range. But his voice it can be kind of it can kind of thin and fragile and brittle as well as athletic. It can feel brittle even though he's in complete control of it. And I think there are bits later down in the album where that's misplaced. But this isn't one of them. This is one of those ones where its fragility seems completely in place and where it should be, which is perhaps just piano music. But I'll say something about the Silk Young Blood later on.
For a lot of people who share some of our sort of common prejudices, this is going to sound like a diss, but it isn't meant that way. Listening back to it, I was thinking this is one of the tracks that could possibly be on a sort of contemporary of the time Coldplay album. It obviously it would have been done differently by them and done very differently by Chris Martin, but it reminded me of a thing. Actually, one of the best reviews I ever read of the Bends, or retrospective reviews I ever read of the Bends, was saying that, and this would have been when the Bends was at least 10 years old or something. It was basically saying in that album Radiohead set the template there that any band could base an entire career on. And not necessarily in a very generous way. So I remember it saying, like, for the Bends, for example, if you listen to Nice Dream, you've got Travis. And if you listen to Just, for example, you've got Muse. I think to be honest, Muse are a bit in good and bad ways are a bit more complicated than that. But I got the point they were making. That there are templates for just workaday careers.
Yeah, the next 20 years of indie music, basically, right there.
Basically, yeah, and the kind of not necessarily the bands I just mentioned, but the kind of bottom feeders of indie as well. With any influential album, you get that though, don't you? You just get bands who go, oh, that track's great, we'll do that for a whole career.
It's funny you say that. I have made a Coldplay and a Muse note on this, and I made just cards on the table. I hate Muse, but I don't hate Coldplay, which does not mean I don't like them. Sorry, it doesn't mean I like them. I don't, but I have a lot. But I find Coldplay bashing really easy and boring. I think it's a really, really good litmus test of how boring the person you're talking to is if they elect to waste some breath telling you how much they hate Coldplay.
Which is why we do it a lot.
Yeah, well, but also around that time, sort of the Coldplay. What's the second album called?
It would have been me and Matt both listened a lot
Rush
to
of Blood,
Rush of Blood,
which I actually still would say is a 7 out of 10 record. But anyway, very unfashionable thing to say. But
the first two Coldplay albums I adore.
Yeah, basically I made a note. Can you blame a band for sounding like the bands it influenced? So yeah, I've said that about Muse as well. I think one of the songs that I think is pretty weak on this, which is Where I End and You Begin. Because it's too long, not much happening. There's so much Muse stuff in there. And can you blame Radiohead for Muse? Not really. That would be church.
Oh, you mean when a band is around, both influential enough and remains around long enough to then circle back and sound like the people who took from it?
Yeah, I get. I guess it's just if you make something that someone finds influential, they start making music based on that isn't as good. That's not the original band's fault, is it? But
It's funny you mention where I end and you begin. That was one track I was trying to be generous to in on re-listen because I didn't particularly remember it fondly, and I didn't get that much out of it this time around. One I did like a bit more was We Suck Young Blood, which I remember being quite dismissive of at the time.
Oh, I love that one too. Yeah, that's great.
I think you told me to give it another go, actually, Matt. Yeah, and I heard more of the kind of funny we mentioned Life in a Glass House before, didn't we? I heard more of the sort of jazzy kind of funereal was the word that got thrown
and
around a lot with
the sort of delayed claps and stuff, yeah.
And the kind of not half-hearted but kind of skittish attempts to do a kind of crazy jazzy drum crescendo at the end, which barely gets off the ground, and I kind of liked all that.
If there's a personification of depression, I think that's the song that does it. Like, because it's not just melancholy; it's melancholy, and then it tries to get out of it, and it can't.
Tries to get out of bed and fails.
Yeah, literally, like that's kind of what I love about it. Although it is a little, and his voice is incredibly raspy in that one, isn't it? It's like he's doing a whole different thing with his voice, so that makes it interesting. But I think I prefer "Sail to the Moon," but. There you go.
That's We Suck Young Blood's one that I've put in a column of again tried to come back to. Didn't like it first time round, but I always put that down to it being slightly difficult and my being 16 when I heard it, and therefore parking it and then coming back and I really tried to like it. I think because I quite like jazz, and it's not jazzy enough. I don't think I do admire everything you've said so far about it being that kind of like trying to get out of bed and failing, and it captures that really well, and it's sort of really. But if you want the kind of sort of New Orleans-y funeral stuff, then you've got sort of Life in a Glass House over there.
Yeah.
And it's one of, and the chords don't quite go as jazzy as I'd like. But, that's not the end of the world. But that's one of the ones that I may note about the voice not really working, because it is really brittle and fragile. But all I want to hear all the way through is a trumpet rather than his voice. Just like a really shrill, like muted trumpet going, because I think that's just a strong way to get that brittleness through. So I find that quite a hard listen. Not that that's necessarily a bad thing. I like being challenged.
I quite like the way the vocals, like you say, it could be done with an instrument rather than the vocal track. But the way he goes, "We suck young blood," and it kind of like moves around just slightly in pitch, and then you got the backing vocals that come down on it, and the way the vocals kind of all come in and out. I think there's just a wonderful arrangement to it. I just think that's what's great. And I think David said a few years ago, I think I played you that Atoms for Peace track, David, and you just sort of quite rightly dismissively just sort of said they just Tom York does beautiful so effortlessly, and I think that's what Radiohead is for me, is just that the beauty of it is just so inherent in every song. Like I just can't.
Well, he makes it look easy. Anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But it just. It's all very primal, I think, for me. As it's not like Richie was saying that. I think you're much more technically minded than me when it comes to music in terms of the music you like.
I don't know about that.
Influences and stuff. Yeah, I wouldn't call interest in prog metal that great, but that's my only sort of I think sometimes I like songs for the technicality, and I think with Radiohead it's much more primal than that for me. It's just kind of. As David said, they just do beautiful so easily.
I wanted to ask you guys about Drunken Punch Up at a Wedding, because since it came out, I've loved that one, and I still do. And I remember, I think at the time, kind of having a line that I was pleased with of describing it as being like a Philip Larkin poem played by Gil Scott-Heron's band, which I think is, because I was a big Larkin fan at the time and everything, and indeed Gil Scott-Heron. But I think I also just summarised it to some people and put it on a few mixtapes and mix CDs and stuff as like the funky Radiohead song. I really love it. I mean, do you guys like it? Or?
I adore it, and I always feel. I'm glad you do as well, because I always feel sheepish liking it, because it's really catchy and really funky and it's really obvious, if you like. But any song which basically is built around a bass hook, I'm in. So I think Colin Green is one of my favourite bassists of all time and doesn't get enough credit, and he's not in the foreground enough for me. So I think it's great.
I have to disagree actually and say it's a bit of a drag, and I think it's probably my least favourite track. We clearly got some aesthetic differences.
And you're the trained bassist.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, it's a great, good bass line. It's catchy. It's the one that feels like it's really trying to paint, like a specific picture, or it's almost like you're in a scene. And for me, that's not the joy of Radiohead for me, really. So no, for me, it's certainly. Again, the worst Radiohead track for me is the best track of from anyone else. So it's not terrible. I wouldn't go to it. I'd never go to it.
I suppose it is a bit more like a little short story, isn't it? I think for me it carries enough of the kind of more subjective Tom York anxieties and things over into it, you know, in the same way that a lot of OK Computer tracks do, where he's sort of vaguely describing social or society situations, but he's completely consumed by his own anxieties and stuff.
Yeah, I think I admire that more. Like it isn't that I demand narrative and literal. Oh, what's the word I'm after? Figurative lyrics all the time. Not figurative. What's the word I'm after? Representational. There we are. Lyrics as opposed to abstract ones. I think he's quite good at them, and I think that using his little sort of weird turns of phrase that he lifted from his notebook as colour, as like, you know, that works better than just a dispassionate list of strange phrases. I was listening to it earlier on and was like, it's Radiohead doing like a sort of soul-y dirge, I guess. But unlike some of the other ones, like Where I End and You Begin, I never get bored. Yeah. But I think it's because if you're going to hang around somewhere for a long time, kind of make it hooky, make it poppy, because then you won't really mind dancing around to it. Whereas, they don't always do that on this record. But
I'd like to, just before we sort of we'll just finish with the album specifically and then summarise a little bit, but I just want to return to Wolf at the Door, partly because it's the closing track, but also because, you know, we talked a bit about Tom York's lyrics and vocals and kind of his anxieties of, you know, just being Tom York in the world, but also being a new parent and stuff like that. I thought it's interesting that obviously Wolf at the Door is a lot about anxiety and about these sort of, you know, in the sense that these are about anything, these songs, you know, but it's drawing on a lot of imagery about, you know, being worried about your family's safety and about your own ethics and principles and things like that. And then it's interesting that it ends with that, again, beautiful Tom York vocal flourish where he's talking about, you know, the possibility of going to the cops about this sort of external threat, and then he just says, I would try to do it, but he just says, then I just go, and just does that lovely note, you know, which kind of closes out the album. So it's kind of like this ultimate relinquishing of action and anxiety in a sense, isn't it? It'll just like, you know, instead I'll just sing this lovely note, you know.
It's a very happy ending for a Radiohead album, isn't it? Actually, if you think about the other albums,
weirdly so. Is it kind of wistfully exhausted? I would have it as, you know. Kind of.
I always really I completely agree. It's great. But rather than like happy, I sort of saw it as a sort of a domestic version of the end of Brazil.
Oh shit!
Just
right,
he's gone.
He's gone away.
Yeah, he's just humming.
He's gone away.
I can't believe how much the end of Brazil messed me up the last time I watched it. Like, oh god.
Yeah, especially Michael Palin.
Oh god, the worst.
Yeah.
I just want to get your top threes from Healthy Leave quickly. Then they don't have to be in any particular order, so you don't have to be in 1 to 3 strictly. But I'll go first to give you additional thinking time. But I think the ones I would pick out from this boringly are There, and that's partly for its power as a single, not just where it is on the album, but it would get on its merits that way as well. I'd probably still have Drunken Punch Up, and definitely on this listen, Wolf at the Door.
I'll go for Sail to the Moon, 2 + 2 = 5, and also Scatterbrain.
Oh, interesting. No crossover at all.
Probably in about that order, probably.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, I've changed my mind over the course of this. Okay, I'm gonna go start boring and say There, and Punch Up. And I've got Backdrift down because, like I said, it was always my favourite, but I'm always surprised about how it's the longest track on the album or something.
It's one of only 2 tracks that go over 5 minutes, actually. There being the other one.
We haven't mentioned Myxomatosis at all, but I know we can't talk about every single track.
I think that is the main one we haven't touched on, actually, which is kind of with the rolling bass of that is kind of. I mean, it's not much like the national anthem, but it's one of the ones that's similarly aggressive in its kind of experimentalism like that, isn't it?
Well, it's the one with the most obvious sort of time signature games going on, I guess. Shit. Yeah, I'm gonna say Backdrift. There we are. I'm gonna die on that hill.
Interesting. Turns out. Yeah, I like the way our top 3 sync up quite well. But I think Matt, I think you made a good case for all of your picks, especially even Scatterbrain, which is kind of one of the subtler tracks on the album, really, isn't it?
Yeah. I don't know what it was I liked so much about that track, but I remember listening to it constantly, like. When we had that green ghetto blaster in the kitchen for a while, I just remember that just being on repeat for some reason.
We touched on In Rainbows briefly, in terms of post Hail to the Thief Radiohead, because obviously they're still a band, they still had some albums out since then. I think they released 2 during the 2010s. Am I missing something? I know Tom York's done his own projects, obviously.
Yeah.
Do you guys have any? Have you engaged much with Radiohead since Hail to the Thief? What's that been like? Rich talked a bit about In Rainbows already.
Love In Rainbows. Took me a while again. Took me a couple of weeks to really get into it, but absolutely loved it. There's a track on In Rainbows which is called Weird Fishes, which I think is one of my favourite Radiohead tracks of all time. It's also got a great opening with 15 Steps, and Videotape is also just a beautiful piece of music.
Yeah, I don't disagree with any of that. Like, the only sort of interesting thing about my approach to it was rather than Matt listening to it for 3 weeks and then getting it, for me it was about a year.
Okay, it took a bit longer.
It took a bit longer, but it may have taken 3 weeks if I listened to it regularly. But I listened to it once when it came out in all that sort of media storm of its release method. Liked it, but wasn't blown away. Didn't listen to it again. That also would have been a function of where I was in my life. I just wasn't spending that much time listening to new music. I'd begun tumbling down that rabbit hole that I'm now well in, of just being cut off from what's happening in the world. And then it was a year later that I listened to it all the time on the way to work and stuff, and then fell in love with it. And then I still love it. I don't know it as well as I know all the other albums, which I listen to death. I couldn't tell you the track order, for example, in the way that I could have had a very good stab at Hail to the Thief.
Did either of you engage much with either King of Limbs or A Moonshaped Pool? Rich, first.
Well, first of all, I was going to mention King of Limbs, because King of Limbs came out when you and I were living together in Whalley Range. And I remember
in a rented room in Whalley Range.
We had arranged that we go tonight in our little hovel. We're going to listen to the new Radiohead record, and we had King of Limbs on, and it certainly didn't grab our attention. I don't think we liked it that much. I don't know. I can't speak for you, because by the end of it, we were just talking over it, and we weren't about other things. We were just it was on in the background, and we weren't
aware we were committing sacrilege.
Yeah, and I haven't gone back to it since, because it was actually quite. I'd almost go as far as say I wasn't enjoying it.
Yeah, like I made a joke saying Radiohead never make a bad album, but King of Limbs is the first one that I would consider. I got up to that 3 week period of listening to it, and it didn't get any better. I just I gave it a really good chance, but right now I honestly couldn't name one track off it, which is pretty bad.
I've always given them the benefit of the doubt that it was me, not them. Because I just, I wasn't focusing on new stuff at the time, and of course since then I haven't listened to anything new for ages. So when Moonshaped Pool came out, in my sense of time is just so buggered that Moonshaped Pool came out last week for me. Isn't it like 2 or 3 years
probably
old now?
More, because King of Limbs is
probably like 4 years.
At least 3, I'd say. Yeah.
Oh my god.
If it feels like it's recent, I haven't even listened to it. And if you told, you could do this with a number of bands, but if you told 16-year-old me that by mid-30s I will not have listened to the new Radiohead album, he would have been very, very disappointed. But that's who I am.
That's one of the weirdest things about getting old, isn't it? You become versions of yourself that your younger self wouldn't recognise, or at least in aspects of yourself that meant a lot to them as their core identity. I listened to A Moonshaped Pool and quite liked it actually, but I can't remember much about it. Interestingly, to compare it to Hail to the Thief and I do remember Burn the Witch, and that's partly because it had that video that again drew on their York's fascination with 70s TV, didn't it? Because wasn't it riffing on was it Camberwick Green and stuff like that? But it had this kind of almost like if the Wicker Man was Camberwick Green, it was that kind of video.
I'll pursue that.
It's 5 years old now, guys. Jesus Christ.
Bloody hell. Wow. I might go back and listen to those 2010s albums and see how I've reevaluated those as well. But thanks for joining me for that, guys, because I think Hail to the Thief, when I was asking you to do it, I sort of said, and hopefully we're right, that there's more to be gotten out of, or there's more fresh stuff to be had in examining this album, because it's not as perfect. I still think if we zeroed in on Kid A, it's not like we wouldn't have had anything to say, but it would have been variants on this is perfect and here's why.
Yes.
Whereas Hail to the Thief, I don't think even the biggest fans of Hail to the Thief tend to say it's a perfect album. They like it because of its flaws and peccadillos and things.
I think people who like it will say that will say the stuff we've said, basically, that it'll either be personal in some way, but no one can say it's perfect. But I've realised that over the course of this conversation how little I think. but I still has a place in my heart.
Yeah, it's interesting. I know, Matt, you were talking to our friend Rosie the other day, weren't you, and saying that she's a big In Rainbows fan.
Well, I mean, that's what we kind of came to realise, is that her, our Radiohead album is Hail to the Thief, and hers is In Rainbows because of the age difference, because she's just a couple of years younger. So, like, when she went to university, that was just In Rainbows had just, been released, and that's just like the entire soundtrack to her sort of time at uni, which is obviously usually a very great time for people. I think it was for her. So, yeah, it's just funny, isn't it? How just the small age difference makes it. Because, when I would talk about, I think she knows Hail to the Thief better now, but when I would talk about it, she'd sort of be like, she didn't know it that well, and it was kind of interesting, like, for me to, but then I was quite glad I liked In Rainbows as well, because then we had a lot of common ground on that as well.
It's always partly the stage these things hit you at, isn't it? Anyway, thank you both for joining me for that, and I hope to have you both back on the show in the future. Particular. Good. But yeah, it's been great to have you, and the fact that you've both been on the show before, and this is but not together. It's nice to combine these guests as well a little bit. And I think you both spoke to that very well. So Matt, would you like to plug your own show?
Plug your pluggables. We me and my friend Mike do a podcast called Matt and Mike Pull Focus, and you can find us on YouTube. We're also on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. If you'd like to like us and subscribe and stuff. We are just in, actually, right now, our episode where we interviewed author Rob Parker has just been finalised, so that should be up by this evening. We interviewed Rob, who is a Manchester crime author, and he talked to us about his career and about Jurassic Park, so have a listen.
Looking forward to that. And Rich, would you like to sell a kidney online or anything?
No. I can be found around public conveniences in the northwest throughout the calendar year.
And I'll hyperlink to a list of public conveniences in the northwest in the show notes. Well, thanks guys. It's been a pleasure. You've been listening to the EscapeGoat podcast, although I don't have to say that because the ident at the end says that, so I'll cut that bit. And that's all from me. David, goodbye. You've been listening to the EscapeGoat podcast, hosted by David Fagiani. If you want to contact the podcast with any feedback or thoughts, you can leave comments on our Libsyn page or under our YouTube videos, or email us at escapegoatpod@gmail.com. You can also reach the show on Twitter on @egoat_pod and follow us for new episode notifications, or get me personally on @deep_Fagiani. This podcast is available on YouTube, Apple Podcasts and Spotify, as well as our Libsyn site, escapegoatpodcast.libsyn.com. Original intro, outro, and any other incidental music for this podcast is composed, produced, and made available by permission of Richard Gilbert. Maybe I'll just play this in the middle. That's how it goes.
Little thong I wrote for you.
It's called Peanuts.
Oh my god, that was the best thing in the world. It's like the best fucking track. Oh my god.
I'd love it if Tom York did a version of Peanuts in concert.
Oh my god. Yeah.
Peanuts.
I really, really would have loved to have been there when they were creating the backing track for that song. It's like, I love the way it does a key change as well. It goes up. It's like there's so much that should be going on in it. It's just brilliant. The best moment ever. What's that song about, George? About peanuts.
Oh, I love it.